In this Q&A video, we're going to answer the question, am I allowed to install round pin sockets and plugs according to the regs? In a recent video, Gary and Gordon reviewed a clever dimmer switch from the MK base range, and as part of their demonstration rig, they used a couple of unusual socket outlets and plugs with round connections instead of the more common rectangular pins, which led a few people to ask if this plug and socket arrangement was acceptable for use still. Well, the accessories in question comply with a British standard that in fairness is pretty old, namely BS 546. Now this standard bears the year 1950 on it, which does make it fairly antiquated. However, a quick glance at the BSI shop website shows its status as current, so it's still a valid standard. But is this a bit of an oversight? Maybe it should have been retired, but it had been missed? Well, let's look at BS 7671 and see what it says with regard to this standard. Under heading 553.1 plugs and socket outlets, we find regulation 553.1.3, where we read, except where regulation 533.1.5 applies, in a low voltage circuit, every plug and socket outlet shall conform with the applicable British standard listed in table 55.1. In table 55.1, we find a list of plug and socket types that are acceptable for use in our installations, and we've got our familiar BS 1363 socket, which is described as fused plugs and shuttered socket outlets, 2-pole and earth for AC. However, in the next line down, we find a slightly different arrangement where we read plugs, fused or non-fused, and socket outlets, 2-pole and earth. And if we track across to the British Standard column, we find BS 546. So you can see there that we can indeed use BS 546 plug and socket connections. However, there are a couple of provisos to this. The regulation immediately after table 55.1 states that every socket outlet for household and similar use shall be of the shuttered type and, for an AC installation, shall preferably be of a type complying with BS 1363. So there's two key points here. If the socket is in a domestic setting, then it must be shuttered. BS 546 sockets come in both shuttered and unshuttered formats, so you'd use a shuttered one in someone's home. And it also says that the preference in this type of installation is a BS 1363, but notice that's just for preference, not an absolute. Also, for a ring final circuit, we find this direction in regulation 433.1.204. Accessories to BS 1363 may be supplied to a ring final circuit with or without unfused spares, protected by a 30 amp or 32 amp. So that very specifically directs that we need to use the square pin sockets for a ring final circuit, and there's no mention of being able to use sockets complying with BS 546. So where, in a domestic setting, might you decide to use a BS 546 socket? Well, one example would be for a lighting application. If we turn to regulation 559.5.1 under the heading connection to the fixed wiring, we read, at each fixed lighting point, one of the following shall be used for the termination of the wiring system. Then indent 5, a suitable socket outlet complying with BS 1363-2, BS 546 or BSEN 60309-2. So let's say you want to operate a standard lamp in the corner of a living room from a switch by the door. You'd wire from the switch to the position of the socket outlet for the lamp. Now we mentioned the regulation earlier that said in a residential setting BS 1363 sockets are preferred. However, might there be a disadvantage to this in this particular application? Well, if you're operating that lamp from a lighting circuit, then it'll probably be protected by a 6 amp MCB. So if someone came along and plugged in a hoover or a heater, then they're going to trip the circuit. So using a round pin socket complying with BS 546 could be an acceptable solution as long as it's shuttered. Also, in a domestic setting, you'll probably want to use a plug with sleeved pins to prevent contact with live parts when inserting and removing the plug. Of course, there may be issues with fusing the supply down and such like if the lamp requires protecting with a smaller fuse, and it is possible to get fused BS 546 plugs for circumstances like this. As with any circuit, the key to using BS 546 sockets successfully is making sure that the equipment installed is correlated to the protective device supplying it. After all, we don't have fuses in plugs complying with BSEN 60309 or commando sockets as they're also known. So there we go. As long as we bear in mind some key points, we can indeed use BS 546 round pin sockets in our installations and still comply with BS 7671. But as always, we want to hear from you. Do you install this type of socket outlet on a regular basis, or have you never used them? Would you be comfortable installing them in a domestic setting after what we've discussed in this video? Please leave your thoughts and questions in the comments section below, and as always, thank you very much for watching.